Well, Title IX is the prohibition against discrimination on the basis of sex in programs or activities that receive federal funds, federal financial assistance. Since virtually every school district receives federal financial assistance of one kind or another, it covers all school districts. The themes will be how sex discrimination can exist and what kinds of steps districts have to take to prevent it in areas such as single-sex classes, single-sex athletic teams, counseling, and all the kinds of related activities that school districts do. It really covers every activity, every benefit, every program that a school district, well, we'll talk about school district, it covers colleges and universities and anyone else who receives federal funds who offers an educational program. But in the context of a school district, it would cover classrooms, it would cover guidance. Even if the school district, for example, had a vocational program that placed students in jobs, the school district would have to assure that the employers were not discriminating if it was a school-sponsored program. And also it also covers sexual harassment, which is a relatively new area for Title IX coverage. And it covers sexual harassment not only of teachers or employees harassing students, but it actually covers where students harass. When one student harasses another on the basis of sex, the school district is responsible to assure that that doesn't happen, or to prevent it and remediate it if it does happen. Well, at the front end, there are two major administrative requirements, and that is, first, there has to be a position designated as sex equity coordinator or Title IX coordinator, which is a person who's responsible for overseeing the Title IX compliance. That does not have to be a full-time position. That could be someone who's doing something else, but the position is assigned to them. And they are responsible for assuring compliance in all areas. One of the primary areas that the Title IX coordinator would be responsible for is the second big administrative area, which is to have a grievance procedure where students or teachers or anyone in the school district can make complaints based upon sex discrimination based on sex. I also would add that discrimination based on gender and harassment based on gender is covered as well. So it doesn't have to be sexual based if it's just gender based, just boys picking on girls or vice versa, without a sexual overtone is still covered. It's really not the type of thing that should have a big differential between a larger district and a smaller district. The grievance procedure just has to be a simple and easy to use, accessible grievance procedure. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be a way by which someone can make a complaint, and that is usually determined by the Title IX coordinator. The regulations actually recommend that there be more than one person authorized to hear grievances, only because of the risk that the Title IX coordinator, whoever is appointed, might be the person who the complaint is against. So other than that, there's not a huge amount of administrative oversight. There is a third administrative requirement that a notice of non-discrimination be issued by the district and it be publicized. And the regulations are a little old, and they refer to mailing and newspapers and everything. Certainly now we would use the internet and email much more for publication. But the regulation does require that every catalog and general circulation memorandum that goes out from the district contain this disclaimer. And it's a typical type of disclaimer. The XYZ district does not discriminate on the basis of sex in its programs or activities. It may be historical. It may be because when this law came into effect in 1972, there was a much more widespread acceptance of things that we would now consider to be discriminatory. For example, at that time, it was very common in the classified ads for jobs. They were for men or for women. That was not uncommon, and certainly physical education, athletic teams, all sorts of activities at schools, home economics versus industrial arts were just taken for granted would be gender segregated. Also, in terms of sexual harassment, but in a minor manner, not in aggravated kind of sexual assaults, but what we would look at as more minor activities, we would now probably also categorize as bullying, which is something where schools have a much greater responsibility. But at that time, there was more of an attitude of, well, that's how the kids are going to behave, and there's not much we can do about it. So I think that it seems to us that there's a great emphasis now, but that's because we're much more conscious of things, and we consider things now to be inappropriate that then we're not as generally considered to be inappropriate. There's one interesting area that I think still continues to have a large effect, and that is schools have to assure that their counseling materials are gender neutral, that they're not counseling girls into traditionally female professions and vice versa. And I think most schools probably do a good job at that. However, there's a secondary aspect to that, which is that where schools find that regardless of what they're doing, there's a disproportionate self-assignment here. For example, if they have a lack of girls showing an interest in science or engineering or things like that, they need to do an affirmative review of their guidance materials and really assure that they're not even subliminally counseling that. And the subliminal can really happen in unexpected ways. I mean, if they use pictures of their successful graduates and all the engineering, the boys, all the kids who went on to engineering are the boys, and that's what they're showing in their showcase, then they're sending a subliminal message that they need to think about. There's nothing wrong with emphasizing successful graduates, but maybe it's time to add some other pictures, and there's certainly nothing wrong with using staged pictures in counseling materials. Everyone does it. So they need to think about those kinds of facts. One major issue is the one you referred to before, is that equity in athletics. There is a huge exception in the athletics rules allowing single-sex teams in contact sports. And of course, contact sports are the ones that tend to be the really popular ones and the money makers, basketball and football primarily. And schools have to assure that there's equity in opportunity. Now, that doesn't mean that you take the number of slots and it's exactly the same. But on the other hand, you can't simply say, well, our girls aren't interested in athletics, because if there hadn't been a viable athletic program for the girls, or if there hadn't been championship teams, then there's always a lot less interest. So it's sort of a cycle that the school has to make sure that it's not falling into. A new area, relatively new area in this area, is the single-sex schools and single-sex classes. Those, of course, historically were used to separate aspirations, really, on the basis of gender. But after that stopped, there was a new emphasis on, maybe because of just innate behavioral characteristics, girls do better in all girls environments, and same with boys. And there have been a lot of experiments with that, both on in schools and in classrooms. And the regulations allow that, provided the school has, or the district has made certain very specifically required determinations, and that there is a full showing of equal access to a comparable program by whatever the excluded gender is. That can actually get a little tricky, because if you have, let's say you have an all-boys class, which you've justified as being consistent with the educational needs of those boys, that doesn't mean that you have to have an all-girls class. To have comparable opportunity, you have to look at the opportunities that the class offers, and you might be able to offer those opportunities to girls in a coeducational class. But you have to make a very specific finding that you've been able to do that. And certainly if the coeducational class, for example, were oversubscribed and you're using a lottery so that girls, even on an equal basis to boys, got excluded from that, you'd have the appearance of equal opportunity, but you wouldn't have the reality of it. Certainly the beginning point is the administration, the administrative aspects. Do they have a Title IX coordinator? Is that person well-versed in Title IX? They don't have to have full-time opportunity to work in Title IX, but are they well-versed in Title IX? Do they understand what the requirements are? Do they have some sort of internal management or review of the Title IX compliance within the district? So that's certainly the beginning way. Do they have a grievance procedure? Do they publicize it as they are required to? And then the next set of steps, I would say, would be to review guidance materials to make sure that they are gender, sex neutral. And then do they have a strong educational policy practice that educates students and teachers, but primarily students, on sexual harassment? It's sort of a companion to the anti-bullying kinds of things. Are they really getting out there before problems happen and making sure that there's an educational program, that it's not acceptable, that it's considered a disciplinary offense, that there will be consequences, and things like that. And finally, it never hurts to go to the numbers, to the statistics. Are they looking at patterns where they have highly skilled or highly advanced technical classes that girls technically have not been in? And do the numbers continue to reflect that? And if they do, that doesn't necessarily put them in violation, but it suggests that they ought to beef up some counseling. They ought to look to the girls who are in the lower grades of math and technical sciences and focus on those girls and encourage them to stay with it and find out why they're not. Is it self-preference? Is it parental? Is it internal at the school district? What is happening? And then maybe try to correct it. Finally, in the area of sexual harassment, in addition to the education at the front end, do they in fact respond aggressively? And there's some confusion between the legal standards for when a victim of sexual harassment can sue in court and win, and where a district's responsibilities are in general outside of the legal matter. For someone to sue and win money damages against a school district, they have to be able to show that the district knew something was going on. On the other hand, if the district had no knowledge of something that was going on before it was going on or while it was going on, but afterwards it's brought to their attention, they're not retroactively liable under the legal case standards, but they must then take immediate action, not only to make sure that they prevent it, they stop it, and that if there's enough of it that's going on that it looks like there's some sort of a pattern going on, then they need to beef up that into more educational activities and things like that. Would say the results are mixed. There are certainly areas where there's a tremendous amount of progress, and you can see that when you look at the UConn women's basketball team. I mean, phenomenon like that really came about because of Title IX or any of the professional women's athletics leagues. That wouldn't have happened without Title IX. So we certainly have made a lot of progress in that area. I think that in the area of sexual harassment and aggressive responses to sexual harassment, I don't know that we've done as well. Certainly, if we're dealing with bullying and generally thought not to be dealing with it aggressively enough, again, this sexual harassment is really sort of a subset of that, and I don't know how well we've been dealing with that. I think in terms of just equal access, if we were talking about a level playing field, I think we're doing well. I don't think that there are institutional barriers. I don't think frequently girls go to their guidance counselor and say, I want to be an engineer, and they hear that's for boys. But on the other hand, I think that there are a lot of subliminal factors that still exist that schools and districts would be well advised to be more aggressive about in terms of recruiting and encouraging and things like that. So I think overall, I agree with you. There's definitely been a marked change in consciousness, and there's much less, if any, overt discrimination on the basis of sex. But there are areas, and certainly sexual harassment, although it applies equally to protect boys and girls. Girls are much more frequently the victim of it. You know about that case in New England where a girl just committed suicide because she was. They talk about bullying, but there's a mention of there's a statutory rape charge there. There may very well have been a component of sexual harassment there, and it was fairly widespread and fairly blatant. I don't know exactly how much the school knew, but you'd think that there would have been an opportunity to know a lot more about what was going on because of how widespread it was. So I would say of all the areas, that's an area that needs probably one of the more aggressive responses, and also in the counseling and encouragement to go into the non-traditional occupations. Well, you begin with having an aggressive Title IX coordinator. I mean, that's the superintendent isn't going to do this from his or her desk, so you want to make sure that you have an aggressive, well-informed Title IX coordinator. The more time and resources that can be provided to that office is certainly a great benefit, so that that person has the opportunity to take the job responsibilities seriously. Then once you get past that point, there are a lot of training activities. It really comes from the top down. When senior management, the superintendent, takes it as an importance and a priority and gives the resources along with the tasks to the Title IX coordinator. Then the Title IX coordinator, if we're talking about a new situation, the first thing to do would be really to do a survey along the lines that we've been talking about. Do they have single-sex classrooms? Do they have single-sex schools? If so, do they comply with the equal opportunity? How are the sports teams organized? Are opportunities provided equitably? Do they have out-of-school programs that the school supports or even requires for completion of some sort of a program that has a clinical, so-called, or an outside aspect? And if so, are they complying in those areas? But it's really a self-assessment is the place to begin.